The story of the Juno, rise of the DCO. The early 80s was full of new styles of music and new innovations. New wave and synth pop were now musical styles that were drawing in the youth and the new crowds to the simple and unique futuristic sounds of synthesizers and sequencer-produced music. Bands such as Soft Cell, A Flock of Seagulls, Depeche Mode, and artists like Gary Newman were combining these elements into catchy songs that took over the record charts. Synthesizer design was also becoming simpler and more accessible to the bedroom musician. The big manufacturers such as Oberheim, Korg, Sequential, and Roland were looking for ways to scale down their turn-of-the-decade monster synths into something more affordable to the mass market. Roland had its Jupiter 8, Sequential its Prophet 5, and Oberheim had its OBXA, but these super synths were generally far too expensive for anyone on a budget looking to add these new sounds to their music. Roland R&D was also looking to solve a problem that was becoming a bigger issue with live musicians: oscillator tuning stabilization. The Prophet 5 had been plagued with tuning issues until switching to the Curtis 3340 designs on the Rev 3. And Roland's first run of Jupiter 8s with the 12-bit DAC had tuning drifts which regularly required the recalibration by pressing the auto-tune button. As it turns out, temperature changes that occur while the synthesizer is operating cause fluctuations in the oscillator tuning, a well-known issue that was compensated for in design, such as in this Roland circuit on the Jupiter 8. Although some liked the subtle detuning of oscillators as part of a vintage analog sound, most found it annoying to have to constantly retune while performing.
Just going to try and get these machines to work. Okay. It's the track called Bounce Right Back.
Roland engineers are looking for a new way forward and came up with a digitally controlled oscillator, the DCO. It's basically an oscillator derived from the pulse waveforms of a programmable divider circuit, which are precisely timed from the circuit's crystal, and thus much more stable, in fact very stable, and it keeps all the oscillators in perfect phase lock with one another. These DCOs provided the circuit a perfect sawtooth wave, which could be then shaped into other waveforms. The rest of the voice circuitry remained as previously designed through a standard subtractive synthesis signal path. Having the word digital in the name also helped marketing compete with the new technologies Roland knew were coming shortly from Yamaha. Roland's first DCO synthesizer, the 6-voice Juno 6, was released in June of 1982 at a price of $1,300, about half of what the Jupiter 8 cost, with a sound that gave you everything needed to dive into new wave and pop music. With the world economy going through a recession, spending on musical equipment was significantly down, so having a more budget-friendly synthesizer option was a must for Roland to financially survive. It was the first synthesizer that a musician could trust to be in tune on stage as it was turned on. In a cheeky move, Roland cleverly moved the tuning adjustment to the back panel, putting it out of immediate reach of the player and making the bold statement to say tuning is no longer a problem with our keyboards. And with an arpeggiator, pulse width modulation, noise generator, and chorus made the Juno 6 a very feature-rich synthesizer. In Roman mythology, Juno was the wife of Jupiter, so this makes sense that it was closely related to the feature set of the Jupiter 8. After the new DCOs created the base waveforms, the Juno 6 shared the same IR3 R01 envelope generator and the BA662 amplifier, as well as the IR3 109 filter IC, giving it a similar sonic character. The Jupiter 8's Z80 CPU, however, gave it a massive advantage of patch memory, which was missing on the Juno 6 to save cost. The Juno 6 was also Roland's first synth to feature the white, blue, and red color scheme that they'd carry forward throughout the Juno series. And the SH series inspired panel layout was easy to understand with its left-to-right flow. The Juno 6, although well received, was not the success Roland had hoped. Within months of its launch, island rival Korg released a 6-voice polysynth, the Poly 6, with a similar feature set, plus a huge added bonus of a 32-program patch memory. The Poly 6, a fully analog VCO-based synth, was designed to compete with the Prophet 5 and was feature-rich with a warm sound thanks to its SSM 2044 4-pole filter ICs. Not to be outdone, with an incredible feat of quick engineering, Roland responded only several months later with the improved Juno 60. The Juno 60 was basically an upgraded version of the Juno 6, featuring 56 program patch memory and Roland's new precursor to MIDI, the DCB interface, which connected to the JSQ60 sequencer and Jupiter 8 via a clunky 14-pin Amphenol DDK connector. Internally, the Juno 60 was very similar to the Juno 6 and shared an identical voice board, and thus had the same internal voice architecture. The additional program memory and control CPU was added to the newly designed right panel PCB where the patch storage buttons were located. In 1983, Roland R&D and Dave Smith at Sequential famously teamed up and created the MIDI specification, such that synthesizers from different manufacturers could essentially talk to one another. Similar to Roland's DCB, but with a much simpler DIN connection, Roland adopted this technology into its new version of the Juno, 1984's Juno 106. By 1984, things had really started to change in synthland. Competitors such as Yamaha's DX7 and Korg's Poly 800 were redefining what a budget-friendly synthesizer could be, and selling truckloads to music stores around the world. Roland's Juno 106 was an attempt by Roland to join this party and deliver a budget-friendly synth that had the sound and features of the Juno line, but included a full MIDI implementation and a much smaller, sleeker look. Inside, Roland condensed the DCO-based design down somewhat, packaging much of the voice circuitry into the ill-fated 817A IC. Coating a small inline circuit board containing the VCA and VCF ICs entirely in epoxy, the 817A made things much easier during assembly. Little did Roland know that the heat-related expansion and contracting of the epoxy would cause internal circuit failures over time, as is the problem with almost every Juno 106. It's not uncommon to replace all 6 of these voice chips in a single vintage Juno 106. Nonetheless, with its 1984 price point of $1,100, it sold incredible numbers and was one of Roland's biggest and much-needed commercial successes to date. The Juno 106 stayed very true to the sound and design of the previous Junos, although the Juno 60 had a slight bass boost in the high-pass filter circuit. Inside the epoxy of the 817A was a surface mount version of the same IR3109 filter IC. Roland also upgraded the bender control section with a new performance control that moved left and right and up for assignable LFO, DCO pitch, and VCF filter. To this day, and because of the quantity sold, the Juno 106 can be found all over the world in the studios of electronic musicians looking for that easy link to the past and those warm Roland pads and 80s classic square wave sounds. Cosmetically, it's one of my favorite synths, with bold blue, white, and red trim on a gray color scheme with yellow buttons. It's something that really stands out in any studio. The Juno series continued on with Roland's Alpha Juno 1 and 2 in 1985, which eliminated all the front panel sliders and knobs in favor of that alpha dial and membrane buttons. Roland also added much needed velocity and aftertouch to the key bed to compete with the standard features with the now extremely popular Yamaha DX series. Another main change was moving to the IR3 R05 IC from the IR3 109, although this minus 24 dB low-pass filter is a similar design and sound. An exploration into the Juno series would not be complete without discussing one of its most beloved features, the chorus. Widely considered to be one of the all-time great-sounding chorus circuits in music. It's based on a bucket brigade circuit which uses an LFO to separately delay 2 hard-pan left and right signal paths, giving a wide chorus effect. With 2 settings, 1 or 2, this chorus gives a super rich effect, and any sound on the Juno instantly turned into swirling stereo richness. Over the years, I've owned several Junos, including a Juno 60 with a JSQ60 sequencer, which I used on several songs, including some from the SSX game soundtrack. I've fixed and sold at least 3 Juno 106s over the years, but I never kept them for long, although I now regret at least saving one of them for my current studio. The Juno sound to me has always been very direct and unmistakably 80s. It always works as a pad, stabs, or even a bass, and fits in well on any track. Its easy to understand panel made it a quick and usable choice for the studio musician looking for instant sonic gratification. The lasting legacy of the Juno series cannot be understated, as these synthesizers have been used on countless albums and hits from artists such as Bruno Mars, Daft Punk, Calvin Harris, and Tangerine Dream. Roland has recreated the Juno 60 and Juno 106 in boutique form, with the JU06 and the JU06A, as well as many other companies have created software recreations, including Roland Cloud, which does a great emulation with its ACB technology. All of this continues to help cement the legacy of the Juno series synthesizers, one of the most beloved electronic instruments of the 80s.